Daddy isn't coming. We're waiting to be saved. There's a direct parallel between Peter Pan doesn't want to grow up and he goes to the island of the Lost Boys. And actually, the Lost Boys, I think, is a metaphor for gay men. We want to just play and be children. And there's something really wonderful about that, isn't it? There's something exhilarating and freeing about it. But at the same time, a lot of us have not really grown up. And I think I'm learning as I'm stepping into being authentic, and God knows I'm old enough these days, but I'm learning to be my own daddy. I think there's something about being my own responsibility.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Unapologaytic Podcast. My name is Pierre. I'm your host and the founder of the ethical gay brand Unapologaytic. And today I'm talking to Darren Brady, who co-founded The Quest, a personal development program for gay men, and also a life coach as well as a facilitator. Welcome, Darren, and thanks for talking to me.
Thank you very much. And we know each other, don't we, Pierre? So do you want to say a few words about how we got to meet each other?
I showed up to a Quest social. I think it was a Tuesday night. I thought, it would be nice to go and meet other gay, bi, trans, queer men in a non-sexualized way. So, for example, where the intention for me anyway isn't to seduce anybody, but just to meet other men and just talk. And then you announced that Quest weekend workshop that was specifically for non-white gay men. And I thought, that sounds interesting, because for once, it's not to prove that we are more likely to be HIV positive, go to jail. It's actually because they wanted to find out about us. So I thought that was a very positive approach. And so I decided to go for it. And that's how we met.
I remember distinctly that program. We actually did 4 programs for BAME communities and individuals. And it was really profound, actually, because I think up until that point, we'd had mixed groups, people from lots of different backgrounds, ethnicities, ages, etc. And when we did the BAME one, which was for Public Health England, they were researching how effective are these kind of interventions. The level of trauma, and I use that word really carefully these days, was off the scale. It was already in the room with our general program, but with that community was really off the scale for lots of different reasons. It had a profound effect on me, and Adeniji, the other founder of the organization, it really informed me, educated me to some of the stories and the context and the challenges that those men had and were facing consistently. And it really deepened my commitment to the work as well, actually. Yeah, I'm really proud of that work, and I was really informed by it as well.
Speaking of the Quest, what made you start the Quest?
I knew Ade. I'd become friends with Ade, and we're both coaches, so we'd become friends. And I think we were interested in potentially working together. And Attitude magazine, this is going back a long way, Attitude magazine did something called the Issues Issue. And what they did is they gave over the editorial to really look at what were some of the issues that we were facing as gay men. Because I think up until that point, HIV had taken the headlines quite rightly. It was such a loss. We'd lost lots of people. It was a real crisis at one particular moment in history. And so that had taken the headlines. And yet underneath that and to the sides of that, there was lots of other problems that were beginning to emerge. Substance abuse, dysfunctional relationships, a really high percentage suicidal ideation, depression, etc., etc. And so when that issue came out, we were alerted to that. And then we went to an event where not only was the data presented, which was devastating, and the kind of headlines were, we are 4 times more likely to dot than our heterosexual peers. And we know now that heterosexual men are very much at risk when it comes to mental health issues, etc. So that was devastating. But the really critical thing, I think, was they got men to stand up and share their challenges. And they each talked about different things. Some of them had an addictive relationship to alcohol. Some of them had been in dysfunctional relationships, etc. And I think that integration of the facts and the stories coming together had a really big impact on Ade and myself. And afterwards, we went for a lunch and we were like, oh my God, this is really happening. It really resonated with us as well, because we'd faced some of those challenges ourselves. We'd also seen it with friends. And we said, we've got this awareness that this is a problem, but what's happening? Who's doing anything about it? And so we just decided to just do a one-off thing where we thought we'll get some gay men together and start to investigate this and hear what their stories were and see if we can find a way of beginning the process of healing. So that's what we did. We didn't do a weekend in the beginning. We did it over 5 evenings, over 5 weeks. And it was profound and incredible because underneath that carpet, all those stories that had never been shared, I think we were all trying to be proud. It was all about gay pride and we're really happy and we're body positive and we're sexually liberated and all that, which is great. And I believe in all of that stuff. And I fought for that as well. But I think underneath that, we weren't telling the story of the shame and of the challenges. And in these spaces, as soon as one person started to have the courage to share, everyone else in the group started sharing. It's like dominoes for one after another. And it was so, just that in itself was healing, actually, to be in a space where people weren't pretending anymore. People were letting the mask down and saying, this is real, this is what happened to me, and this is how it impacts me today. And so it became really clear, Pierre, from that experiment, I thought, there's work to be done and we need to do the work. And so that's really started, that was a catalyst then for developing, modifying, and expanding on this idea of sharing stories with an intention of healing. And that started everything off. And this is, like you say, I think it probably goes back about 12, 13 years now. And we've done so many different things over that period. But that's a very long answer to a question. Like, how did it start? It started from the need and the evidence.
And I remember seeing something at the Royal Vauxhall Tavern. Didn't you do something about reading from The Velvet Rage?
We did a storytelling performance, but it wasn't the Royal Vauxhall Tavern. We hired a venue and we got a group of the guys that had done the program. And we said, wouldn't it be amazing if we could share these stories, not just in this very safe, therapeutic room, but put it on a stage. And these guys were interested. So I worked with them over several months where they told lots of different stories and we put them together and then they went on stage and shared it with an audience. Very powerful. For the guys telling the stories and also healing for the audience, many of whom resonated deeply with the audience as well. And I think it really speaks to shame. So if we just talk for a moment about shame, Brené Brown, one of the researchers and one of the voices that became very popular talking about shame, said it needs 3 things to grow: secrecy, silence, and judgment. And so what we were doing in the programs and what we did with the storytelling is we were doing the opposite of what shame wants and requires. We were speaking it out loud and sharing it, which is what made it quite exceptional, actually, and still is quite exceptional to talk about shameful things and share those things with people we feel we can trust. It's very counterintuitive and it's countercultural. As a culture, we're not encouraged to talk about things that we're ashamed of. And what that does is it builds that shame, or it allows that shame to reside and influence our choices in life. So storytelling was a natural extension of what we were doing from the personal out into communities at large.
And I think that shame is compounded by marketing and the pressure to sell, the sort of images we are bombarded with of fake perfection that really is not attainable. There's no way we can be like that.
And that's what's interesting about what you're doing, because you've created a company that sells merchandise, clothing, etc. And I'm curious about how do you navigate that dynamic, because from a capitalist selling point of view, it works. There's people make profits and there's skyscrapers. They're the temples of validation when it comes to these things. So how do you manage with your company to navigate that kind of dilemma around presenting something which could be a trigger for people to feel shamed about their size or how they look or their attractiveness?
First of all, I always think about the message. And to me, the message of the brand is embrace who you are. It's really about who you are. And I also try to have two aspects to marketing. There's just sort of really indulging the fact that, in my opinion, men are visual creatures, and also sex sells. Just have good looking people, really, in terms of, and it's not just my vision of good looking. So it's diversity in good looking. It's not just about my vision. And also, what I prefer is to actually show customers, real people wearing the t-shirts. And that's my idea of creating a community. Having the sort of hunks modeling is really to appeal, but also to, once you're here, let's be real and let's show you who actually wear the t-shirt, just like you and me, really.
Yeah.
That was a long answer, sorry.
That's interesting because I think as an organization, we've always been very conscious around how we portray what we do, the words, the language that we use, but also the imagery as well. And there's been the opportunity to, I would say, to use images that are of classically attractive people, but we've always avoided doing that because we just felt it was contrary to what we stood for and what the whole purpose of our mission was. And so we, much like yourself, we used people that have been on the program. In fact, I think you came along. We knew that we needed a library of images so that we could use them. And of course, we never had cameras or we never record anything that happens in the Quest program because it's a really sacred, safe space and it would not work. So what we did is we brought guys back into the same. Do you remember when we did this? You came to me. You were great. You've always put yourself forward and volunteered, which I really appreciate about you, Pierre. You've paid it forward, if you like. And we reconstructed the program a little bit with a photographer. And we still sort of use a lot of those images today, but we were very careful about who we invited because diversity is important and imagery is incredibly powerful, I think. And I think we wanted to utilize that power in a way that really served the work. So thank you for being one of the poster boys for the Quest. And you're still flying around the internet ether somewhere. Your images will probably
10, 12 years later. So no, but actually, no, thank you for starting this program because actually that really inspired me to launch the brand as it is. And because the minute I got the idea to start a gay t-shirt brand, instantly I thought I want to do more than having witty slogans and stuff like that. I really want to promote something positive about ourselves. And instantly I thought about the Quest. And that's how the No Shame t-shirt came about.
Yeah, it's great actually because we talk about head, heart, and hands, like the three elements that are required: head, thinking, understanding; heart, emotions; and hands, the doing. And I think you took the head and the heart and you put it into your business here in the hands. You made something, you created something. So you integrated all that understanding and awareness and put it into something, to extend that message, etc. So I've always been really inspired by the fact that you used your head, your heart, and your hands to create what you've created.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That means a lot. Thank you. And can you share some success stories from the Quest programs?
Wow. Okay. Actually, you know what, Pierre? It is brilliant now that we've been going for so long because quite naturally we bump into people. If I'm in London, particularly because we did a lot of the programs from London, I often bump into people and they always bring up the Quest. They also retell stories and memories from the program. And they also update me on where they're at. And so there's so many different things that people have got from doing the program. Sometimes it might be a person that's been in relationship hopelessness for quite a long while, been quite cynical. And as a consequence of doing the Quest, but then following on with more work, they found themselves able to engage in relationship. And so very often people say, oh, I've got a partner now and we've been together for a while. Sometimes they get married, sometimes they're civil partnered or just living together. So it's a massive win for some people. Other people, it's about letting go of things. So some people say, it's brilliant. I no longer have a relationship with this member of my family. It was very toxic and I'm a lot happier as a consequence. That's something I've done recently, actually, with a very close member of my family. It's what I call I divorced them, which is conscious uncoupling. I think if the dynamic isn't working and there's some level of toxicness around it, I think it's a powerful thing to say, let's stop doing this. So very often people break with those relationships that are not working. Some people change direction. They change their relationship to their bodies. So they have a healthier relationship to eating and exercise, you name it. And that has been some of the results of doing what we're doing. But interestingly, we got money recently from the National Lottery. And what we said we wanted to do was analyze what the impact of the program had been. Because we heard all these stories about what had happened, but we didn't have any kind of raw data. So we've recently taken on an independent researcher and we did a questionnaire with all the people that had been on the program, and they're just working on it at the moment. So I have no idea what's going to come out. It's going to be interesting because I think we like to think we had a good impact, but maybe we did, maybe we don't. But because it's independent and it's all anonymous, we're hoping people were honest in their reflections back, and we'll see what the results are. So in the next few months, hopefully, we'll be able to publish the findings of that, and that will give some data. And organizations, they love data. They like to listen to stories, but they want the data. So I think it'll be an important moment for us to find out over the last 10, 11, 12 years of the quest, what impact it's really had.
How has the quest impacted you?
Oh, God, I think what the quest and the other work that I do, because I also deliver Brené Brown programs. I'm one of the certified facilitators with that. We do that work as well. I think combined, and also the coaching work that I do, has run parallel to my own development. Apart from the quest, I always participate in the programs I'm delivering. I'm always a punter first, and that means that I understand the process and I learn from the process. And the same with the coaching. I have therapy, I have coaches, I have people to support me. So as I've been delivering this work, I've been learning and growing in the same way that the participants have. And what it's really done, Pierre, is it stopped being something I do and it started being how I live. So it's completely integrated. Like, I don't think of it as personal development work. I think of it as my life. I've got it here, actually. I have my journal. Everywhere I go, it's never more than a meter away from me. And this used to be a device. It used to be a tool. It's a bit like having my phone. If I had to lose one of these things, I'd be more devastated to lose this than lose this, because it contains my thoughts, it contains my affirmations. It's something I refer to as best friend, and I wouldn't want to lose a best friend. I might write in it in the morning, the evening, but it's just part of who I am. I think it's become just one thing, and I think that's enabled me to feel more centered, and it's allowed me to be braver with some of the choices that I've made in my life.
Speaking of choices, earlier you said, if I'm in London, where are you now?
Yeah, I made this choice to become a nomad, which I know it's a very cliched term. I suppose I'm a digital nomad now. You're in Brighton, aren't you?
Yeah.
And I'm in Las Palmas, which is the capital of Gran Canaria. So I'm in Spain. But I've actually been nomadic really for the last couple of years. And I took the final step recently of letting go completely of my flat in London. So in a way, I have no fixed abode. It sounds quite dramatic, but I'm moving from place to place. On Thursday, I go back to London, then I go to Thailand for 3 months, spending quite a lot of time in Asia. So I'm moving around, and I think that's an example of a brave choice, because what I realized was it's something I wanted to do. It's something that feels right for me. It's countercultural. So even my friends that know me, yeah, but where are you going to settle down? They think eventually I have to go back to the traditional way of living. And maybe I
Yeah.
will, but right now I'm really enjoying moving around, working, living in different parts of the world. And that's part of my authentic courage, if you like. That's part of me stepping fully into what feels right for me.
How did you get to the point where you allowed yourself to actually choose the life you wanted?
Yeah. You know what? I think it was partly a reaction to COVID. COVID was terrible for me. I live on my own. I love moving and travel. And then suddenly not being able to travel and being on my own and isolated, it was incredibly lonely. And it was actually really tough. And so as soon as the restrictions started lifting, I was the first out of the. I was like, hotels were barely opening their doors, and I was like, "Let me in." Like everything had loads of dust on it. Everything was not ready, and so I started doing it then. So I think partly it was part of my intentional healing from that period of time because I knew it had an impact on me, and I knew I needed to recover. So the first part of it was about recovery, and then it just extended into, wow, actually, one of the positives that came out of COVID was I can work virtually. I can coach people any part of the world. Whereas before, I was located in London. I had a practice in central London and I had to see my clients there. Whereas now I'm able to be in other places. So that was that. But I think I've always liked moving. When I was a kid, I just get on my little tricycle and going down to the end of the road and going on adventures. It's always been part of who I am. And I think it's a very natural way of human beings behaving. In fact, I did a bit of research around nomads. And what I discovered was prior to industrialization and what happened within agriculture, we were, as a human species, we moved from place to place. That was the initial starting point. And some cultures and people still do that. But they're now seen as the odd ones out because industrialization and the way that we started to farm made people stay put because we needed to produce and it wasn't effective otherwise. So it's almost like going back to that prior state of movement. I think it's a very natural thing to do.
Especially when we are not in the industrial age anymore. We don't need to be in a particular space.
And then you travel a lot. Do you still work?
No, I used to be. No, also when COVID hit, I decided to stop flying. So I became less nomad.
So we've gone the opposite.
Yeah.
How is that for you then? Because you've gone from being very mobile, flying, to being more in one location. How have you found that transition?
I was scared to miss it because I've always seen myself as loving the sort of shift pattern, really. But actually, I'm surprised by how much I love having a routine and I love being structured. And that's really impacted my life and even my physical health. I was not that I was in bad health before, but much better health now just because I can exercise regularly. All of that is really almost automatic.
Do you think, Pierre, that I'm putting you on the spot with a question, but do you think that your decision initially to work in the airlines did shame play any part of that wanting to escape, that wanting to remove yourself from the norm, from the society?
No, shame. I've understood that a few months ago. Shame has run so many areas of my life. But being cruel, actually, no. That was linked to childhood trauma. So as a child, I grew up in the Caribbean and I felt really trapped because my parents were neglecting me. I really felt so far away from everything because I thought all the interesting things happened far away from me. So my dream was to travel. And I'm so grateful that I did travel. Really.
Yeah. There's a great sense of escape as well in what you're saying. It felt like you were escaping not only a childhood which was difficult, but also that feeling of being slightly left behind, that greater things were happening in different locations.
Yeah.
But I think for myself, when I was young, much like you, I couldn't wait to get away from home. I just was dying to leave. So my moving away from home was partly to have an adventure, and to discover these places. But it was also, I think, if I'm really honest, at a deeper level, it was a way of avoiding what could become quite shameful experiences, because I was getting to the age where I wanted to have relationships, but I didn't want to be questioned by my family. And so by moving away, I dodged potentially shameful conversations about who and what are you doing and all that kind of stuff. So for me, there was an element of shame in moving away from that norm, those things. And I was avoiding being in conversations which were going to be difficult. So I was really avoiding it, I think. And yeah, I think now my movements around the world, I'm not trying to avoid something. It's really more of a celebration and a wanting to expand my life. But I think in the past, shame was attached to moving away from what I knew and the family that I had.
What is different now in your life as a nomad? Or maybe another way to ask is, what do you have now? What do you enjoy now that you didn't before?
I think this is the bad news. I think being authentic and being brave comes with often quite a lot of doubts and insecurities and anxieties. There are moments where I just think, I don't know what I'm doing. There's no template for this. Why am I doing this? Most of my friends aren't doing it. I don't have that kind of thing to fall back on. So I have to be very secure and centered. When people say, what feels like home? My answer, and it's not a trite answer, is this is my home. I am my home. I create my home. This is my home. This is me and my home. And I think it really has made it really important for me to stay conscious, creative, and intentional. And I think before, I spent a lot of my life being reactive, automatic, and unconscious. And I think it's that flip to that other way of being. And so, for instance, I used to go out with friends and drink my pints and get obliterated. I can't afford to do that. I can't afford to become unconscious now, because my life demands that I stay clear and centered with what I'm doing, because I think I probably would get completely lost otherwise.
I can relate to that. When I stopped flying the first year from 2020 to 2021, the time when I had to shift from being employed by someone else and being self-employed was really challenging, because I was always looking for validation, but not validation as a way to avoid uncertainty, because I was doing my own thing. And that was really terrifying, that sort of uncertainty. And I really drove myself crazy for a full year. Really, I would wake up every morning feeling dread, thinking, how can I find security? How can I find actually what I wanted to know was, if I break my back working, am I going to make it? And that, because at the time I had launched a second business out of shame. Actually, that's the thing, because I was ashamed of running a gay brand. I launched a fashion brand because in my mind that would legitimize myself as a business owner. And of course, because I'm trained as a product designer rather than a fashion designer. So I shamed myself again. The second business was really hard to sell because I was ashamed of myself. It took a lot of work and a lot of therapy to actually understand what was happening and really focus and own really unapologetic and the photography and all of that.
Yeah. You say it took a lot of work. I would suspect it takes a lot of work, because I don't think it's ever something that we completely get our heads around. I think there's this idea, I think, that being authentic is this wonderful place where everyone's being brave and courageous and it's all fabulous. Yeah. But it's not like that. It's tough. Am I really making that decision? Yeah, it is really tough and demanding, and it disrupts everyone else's thinking. People want me to fall into line. People are confused. It triggers things in people. So it's a very disruptive thing to be authentic. And we can see this, can't we? in this whole debate and this whole shambles of a disgraceful situation around trans people. It's like people are being who they are. That's all that they're doing. And it's disrupting and upsetting all these other people with whom it's got nothing to do with. It's not their lives.
Exactly.
And so I think being authentic is a revolutionary act, and actually choosing to create something like what you've done is revolutionary. It takes a lot to do it, but the benefit, I think once you step into that arena, it's very hard to go back, isn't it? I can't imagine you're going to be knocking on Virgin's door saying, you know what, I'm giving up my authentic life and I want to come back and work for you. I can't see that happening, because I think there's something very compelling about being honest with ourselves and living the life, designing our life.
It's nothing to do with knocking on someone's door to get a job. It's just that I think the idea is about when you find what you want to do with your life, then that's what you need to do. For me, anyway, so far, not because I do what I want, that my life is easy. It doesn't mean that life is going to be always easy. And there are still things that I can't stand doing. And that, again, it took me some time to understand that there are still things I will not like doing.
When you were describing that panic and that dread actually in the morning, I've come across this phrase recently, which is "Daddy isn't coming." In fact, that could be a great T-shirt for you, because from a psychological perspective, what it's saying is, to some extent, a lot of us are waiting for Daddy to come. We're waiting to be saved. We're waiting to be cared for. And actually, Daddy's not coming. And I think when a person chooses to be a freelancer or steps out of an established, safe work environment, we're really facing into Daddy's not coming. You become the daddy. You are the daddy. And I think that gay men have wanted to be boys, have not really wanted to be the daddy, actually. And the whole thing about Peter Pan, there's a direct parallel between Peter Pan doesn't want to grow up and he goes to the island of the Lost Boys. It's where the Lost Boys live. And actually, the Lost Boys, I think, is a metaphor for gay men. It's like we want to just play and be children. And there's something really wonderful about that, isn't it? There's something exhilarating and freeing about it. But at the same time, a lot of us have not really grown up. And I think I'm learning as I'm stepping into being authentic, and God knows I'm old enough these days. If it doesn't happen now, it's never going to happen. But I'm learning to be my own daddy. And I know that from an age perspective and everything, I'm categorized as daddy these days. But I think there's something about being my own responsibility.
I've just done some therapy a few months ago, and that really made me realize how much, even though because of childhood trauma, my dream was to grow up, but I still go through life as a traumatized child. So I think the irony of always waiting to grow up, and then when I do grow up, I still behave like a child. But at least now I'm aware of it. Whenever I catch myself, I can assert myself and try to behave like a grown-up.
Wow. It sounds like you've really delved into the therapeutic exploration and really come to terms with some hard truths, not only about what happened to you, but also about how you see yourself. Two sides of the same thing.
What's the relationship between self-acceptance and personal growth, especially for gay men? Or is the same?
I think the exploration has to start with self. If we start from the viewpoint of other people, I have to have a clear understanding and a reality check around what happened to me, what did I make it mean? It starts with myself, and then we build out from that awareness. So then once I've built an understanding and awareness from that, I'm more able to relate and communicate with other people, and then beyond that into society as well. So I think, what was it? Self-development and what were the two things?
Self-acceptance.
I think self-acceptance is critical. I think without self-acceptance and self-compassion, we can't do the inquiry. It's something I didn't fully understand when I first started, even doing the quest, was how important self-compassion was, because it's hard to take a look. It's hard to lean into pain of the past and pain of the present. And we can only really do that if we have an attitude of self-compassion, if we can hold ourselves and have people around us that can hold us too. But we have to start with self-compassion. So I say self-compassion and self-acceptance are right at the heart of any ability to step outside of default negative, unhealed behaviors.
And for people who are watching or listening to us, is there anything you can recommend to foster that
Actually,
self-compassion?
I've got a few books here. So the first thing I would say is The Velvet Rage is a great book to start with. It's what we use for the quest. Talking about it really helps. It tells the stories from it's a therapist that's written it, doctor, but he tells the stories of these gay men. A little bit dated, mainly about the white gay male American experience.
I was going to say it's very white.
It's very white. But you can, I mean, I'm working class northerner, so it made no sense to me when he's talking about these rich Americans, but I could take the nuts and bolts from the book.
Shame is shame after all.
Exactly. And then the next one, which I think takes it to another level, is by Walt Odette, another psychotherapist, Out of the Shadows, and it takes it to the next level. And then I think moving beyond, and so this book, half of it's about shame, and the rest is about authenticity. A quarter is about shame, and the rest is about how to move into being authentic. And now I've moved to a completely different thing, which is this book, Bell Hooks, Black woman who wrote all about this, and this is about love. So this is fully in the realm of being authentic. And this is a brilliant book because it really starts to articulate what we find hard to explain, which is what is love and how does it show up and what is required. And when I read this, I thought, oh my God, I'm only just beginning to get my head around, do I have the potential to form a loving relationship? So, I think books are a great start. And then I think beyond that, find the environments where you feel enriched, challenged, and where you grow. And I say challenge is important because it takes a lot to turn around some of the thinking and the internal dialogue. It takes challenge, it takes bravery to do that. So I think being in challenging situations is an essential part of growth.
And in your experience, once again, as a life coach, do you think there's a common thread of challenges that gay men or LGBTQ people face?
Yeah, I think it's trauma. I think growing up as a different member of a family, most of us are the exceptions. Most of our families are not gay families with the occasional heterosexual in them. They're heterosexual families with the occasional homosexual within them, I think is developmentally quite traumatic for a child. And I think that's as much the case today as it was 20, 30 years ago. I think by the age of 6 or 7, we've internalized a lot of messages around I am different.
Yeah, I can't talk about it.
Can't talk about it. I'm different. I'm wrong. We judge ourselves, and then we spend the rest of our life trying to deal with that judgment we've made on ourselves. So I think it's interesting because there's been a lot of work around trauma, and I've attended many seminars where they look at the context of trauma. So some indigenous tribes, for instance, have a very specific trauma related to who they are and how they've been treated by the wider society. Or women that have been abused, or there's lots of context where people are beginning to articulate what that trauma created. The one absence that I found, there's been a bit of a vacuum around explaining and discussing the trauma of being LGBTQ, being born into heterosexual families. And I still think that's an edge that we haven't really got our heads around yet. So ultimately, it is that trauma and how we recognize it, discuss it, and move beyond it, I think.
Would you think you've experienced that trauma?
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was born in 1965. It was just another world. There was so much outward homophobia. It was completely accepted. Gay people were child molesters. Yeah. That was the message. We were child molesters. We were perverts. We were dirty. We then
And later on, there was AIDS.
we contracted.
Later on in the 80s, that was horrible.
It was the punishment for all these terrible things. So that was what I was born into. That alone is traumatic. But then adding to that the family stuff, my relationship with my father was distant, and it was unspoken. It wasn't outwardly homophobic, but I think my dad didn't know what to do with this gay child. And my brother, who is only 1 year older, he absolutely knew what to do with him because he was straight. And so I was witnessing my brother being loved and cared for by my father in a way that I was not receiving. That was traumatic because it's one of the most primal, important relationships, mom and dad. And my relationship with my dad was distanced from birth, really. And that was traumatic. So by the age of 5, I'd already killed off my father. Okay. I'd already decided that I was not going to engage with someone who was not engaging with me. And that's a massive rupture in a fundamental relationship. So if that's not trauma, I don't know what is, really.
Have you ever had a chance to mend that relationship?
No, because my father died when I was 8.
Oh, sorry about that.
But I've investigated it and I've talked about it with other family members, and I've had hypnotherapy and tried to trace back what was going on. Because obviously as a 3, 4, 5-year-old, I didn't know, I didn't have any conscious understanding of that. It's only kind of through a lot of therapy and kind of joining the dots together that I have an understanding of what happened there. Form the basis upon which I then try to form relationships with men. Not a good start, not a good foundation. I used to go looking for men that would do what my father used to do, which was not see me. My father didn't really see me. And I remember once being in a bar and I was really attracted to this guy, and he was sat on a bar stool and I was hovering around him and I was just intuitively attracted to him. And after a while, it was quite dark in the bar. After a while, I suddenly realized he was actually asleep. So I'm spending all my time and my energy trying to get the attention of someone who's actually asleep. And I thought, that's a metaphor. That he represented my father. And I thought, you've got to stop. You've got to go out and actually meet people and connect with people who can see you, who want you. I had to challenge my own default, going back to trying to heal that relationship I didn't have with my dad. It had a massive impact on the kinds of men that I was attracted to. And if I'm not careful, if I'm not mindful and conscious, I can still fall into that trap. If someone doesn't show me attention, keep them mean, keep them keen, that's referring to that. Then I'm really keen. So I have to break that pattern because that's not healthy engagement for a relationship.
So how do you think that trauma in general, how do you think that informed your capacity as a therapist?
When my father died, actually people say, when did you start coaching? When did you become a coach? And I say from the age of 8, because when my dad died, my little 8-year-old self decided that I had to take care of everyone else. So one of the first things that I said to my mum when she told me that dad had died was, who's going to look after the garden? That's not a child that's allowing his own grief. That's a child that's decided, I need to take control of this situation. And so that was really the role I took on board at age 8. And I basically coached my mom for the next 4 or 5 years. And my father died very unexpectedly on Boxing Day of a cerebral hemorrhage. So he was 37 years of age. No one expected it. And so every Christmas, there was this memory of this trauma that had happened. And so I would be very alert to, particularly with my mom, is she okay? Is she upset? And she tried to hide it. So she would leave the room, but I knew there was something wrong. So I started to hone my skills around being intuitive. And I would follow her, find her crying in another room, and I would coach her. And she'd say, I'm a terrible mom, I can't do this. And I'm like, no, you're not, you're doing great. And I would coach her through it. And so I really started learning how to be a coach from the age of 8. And I think we can all use these very often traumatic or very difficult, challenging times and experiences. If we can harness them, it can actually become our superpower. And many people have told stories about how they turn things around. And I think for me, the experience of being different, being gay, being separated from my closeness with my father, then his death, and looking after my mum, I think that all informed my interest in what's really going on here, what's happening, like trying to make sense of the unspoken, of the silent stuff. I think that's probably why I'm able to do the job that I do.
And who was coaching you as a child? Or who was supporting you?
God, I wish you'd been around when I was a young kid and someone had asked that question, because I think until I went to school, I didn't really have anyone to turn to, actually. I was very much self-sufficient on my own. Luckily, when I went to school, I got a surrogate mum from a teacher. In fact, I'm still in contact with her today. And in fact, I saw her in London a few weeks ago, and she was my drama teacher. She became my surrogate mum, and she supported me in ways that my mum wasn't able to, and was very influential. So we do find, hopefully, people somehow find the support that they need, because that's really critical, I think.
Again, from your experience as a therapist, would you have some lessons or insights from coaching so many gay men?
Insights in terms of what?
In terms of if there's a set couple of issues we work with or we work through, or is there some sort of recurring theme in the issues?
Regardless of what the context is, because everyone's context is different. Your context, being brought up in the Caribbean, is different from mine being brought up in a working class family in Manchester. So context is always unique. But I think what's really important and is general is we need to find people with whom we can share our stories with. People that we can trust, people that will not judge us, people who encourage us to really completely tell the story, where we can be vulnerable, where we can be honest. I think that's what's critical. Some people have that in their relationships. Some people have that with their families, miraculously. I don't know how, but they do. Most of us need to find some kind of professional support to do that. Therapists, coaches, sometimes a best friend. But that's where the healing begins, when we are able to be witnessed by someone who's not going to judge us, who's going to hold what we tell them in a way that is nurturing. That's where the healing begins. And I think that's what's important. And people, if they want to move on, they have to find a person or a way of finding that relationship and building that relationship.
Do you think there's a LGBTQ community in the way? Would you think it's the same as 10 years ago, 15 years ago?
I think community is whenever people assemble, come together, and enjoy or support each other. Now, that could be three friends that like to do cross-stitching. That's a community. It could be a gang of guys that like to take an ecstasy tablet and stand on a podium and have a great time. So I don't think there's one thing which is community. I think there are...
It's a micro sort of network, small network of groups of people.
Yeah. I do think we can come together to talk about some of the big themes. I think intersectionality. I can talk with you as a black man, or however you identify from an ethnic perspective.
As a black man.
As a black man, yeah. And I think that young and old and working class and middle class and upper class, I think we can all connect on a human level. And I think it's really important, and we can learn from each other. I think that's really exciting and important. I think living in silos is comfortable, but it doesn't often encourage growth. And so I think we can create any community we want. So long as people feel heard and respected, then I think that those are the factors that create community. And I think the problem is that only some people have felt heard and some people have felt respected in the LGBTQ arenas too. It's in the UK was predominantly white gay men on the scene, and there's been quite a lot of work done around being more integrated. But even if I think the challenging thing for me to do is say to myself, who are my friends and how integrated and diverse are my friend circles. That's the place to start, because that's when I realized, oh shit, I'm living in a silo here. If all I've got are white gay male friends at the same age as me, that suggests I'm not really expanding my horizons and I'm not really learning. So I often look at, actually, who are the people I'm hanging out with? Who are the people I'm giving time to? Because that's where understanding and growth it begins. Proximity to difference. I don't know if that answers the question around community. Does it? Do you feel it's been answered?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking. So, but my idea of community personally is, especially because I'm a foreigner and I don't have my family here. So I really have a chosen family around. So that's my community.
Yeah. And I think chosen family can be an amazing thing. If I was a dictator, and some days I would love to be a dictator, I just tell people what to do, I would say all families should be disbanded when a person is 16 years of age. A bit like when animals leave their family, animals leave their bear cubs, blah, blah, blah. All of that.
Oh, yeah, they're just like, okay, bye-bye, thank you.
Yeah, that should happen. And then if you want to engage, you have to re-engage. You have to purposely...
You have to reapply.
With your family, yeah. Very often, the dynamics, it's just not healthy. So I think creative family, what was the phrase you used?
Chosen family.
Chosen family is powerful. And if in your chosen family you have some blood family, then fine. But if you don't, fine as well.
Yeah, I have an older brother. And there is something in the fact that we grew up together that I don't have with my chosen family. But I'm also grateful that I get on well with my brother. But that's not everybody's case.
Yeah. I think we've covered so much. I'm exhausted. When are we going to stop? We could just carry on talking forever.
I have one more question.
Okay.
What's your idea of embracing who you are?
My idea of embracing who I am, I think it's about being still and pausing, actually. It's about space. It's about space to pause and to feel. Actually, it's about feelings. It's about creating a life that is predominantly feeling based rather than thinking based. Letting my heart, it all sounds very woo-woo now, but letting my heart inform what I do and how I behave, rather than letting the head dictate what I do and behave. And what I've found in the last few years, I have that intention of being heart-led rather than head-led. It's taken me in very different places, very different directions, but it's always served me and it's always enriched me and given me a more intense experience of my life. And it's challenging to do. Sometimes my head wants to dictate. It's like trying to pull me back. But when I think that's a core thing, is coming from the heart has been a big shift for me.
Very inspiring.
It's a good place to end, isn't it, I think?
Yeah, I think so too. Where can people find you?
So 2 places. If it's the Quest program that Ade and I do, thequestawaitsyou.com is our website, and lots of information. If it's to speak to me directly, and I love to hear from people like we've been communicating today, if people are curious, my own website is darrenbrady.com. So Brady, no E with it. darrenbrady.com is my website. And yeah, I really encourage people just to reach out, say hi. Let's create a conversation.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Do you have anything else you would like to share? Any parting thoughts?
Not really. I just think what you're doing is fantastic. I've been following your project and you've been involved in what we've been doing. So I just want to say again, thank you for being creative and brave. We need as many creative and brave people in the world, and you are inspiring. So thank you for that, and thank you for creating this space for this conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Me too. Thank you so much. So, well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening, watching, and please leave comments, share, likes, send some love. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. Bye, Darren. Thank you.